All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live event. My name is Tatiana Rice, Deputy Director for U.S. Legislation at the Future Privacy Forum. I'll talk for a little bit, giving an introduction as more folks start to jump into the webinar here. I'm thrilled to have two distinguished guests with me today, Colorado Senate Majority Leader Robert Rodriguez and Connecticut Senator James Maroney. Senator Rodriguez sponsored the Colorado AI Act, the first comprehensive AI law in the United States, while Senator Maroney played a pivotal role in shaping a model framework for AI governance in Connecticut. Both senators have been working tirelessly since last summer, kind of convening a bipartisan multi-state working group to really understand AI and develop effective governance strategies. And despite significant efforts and support from various stakeholders, Connecticut's bill did not pass this session, but Colorado's successful passage marks a very significant milestone with what is to come. So today we're going to dive into their experiences, the challenges they face, and what the future holds for AI legislation in the US. So Senator Rodriguez and Maroney, I am so incredibly happy and excited to be here with you today. And at this moment of time, it's genuinely been one of the most significant professional milestones of my career to have worked with you both. So before we dive into our discussion, could you both kind of give a brief overview of your journey with AI legislation, kind of what motivated you to spearhead these efforts, especially given both of you have moved forward data privacy laws in both of your respective states?
I'll start. So in 2022, I passed Colorado's Privacy Act, which was the third in the nation. And I think right after I had kind of got it passed and it was getting through, I received an email from a random legislator out of Connecticut who just reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm working on a policy over here and would love to know how you did it." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know if there's a real secret sauce, but this is the tips I did and got." And it was an exciting time. And it was probably a very similar battle to what we had with this bill. It's like, we need federal regulations. This is going to end the world as we know it. And, it doesn't go far enough. And here we are 2-3 years later, and getting close to half the states in the country are looking at privacy. But I think that started a relationship with me and Senator Maroney. We started meeting at state conferences, and he worked on his Privacy Act, and we had common colleagues that we worked through the policy that I had worked with, that I referred to him, and he brought some people to the table like you, Tatiana, and people we got to meet. But once that bill passed, I did take a break. I had a plan. Many of you may not know, my wife does privacy, and my venture into privacy was with remote notary bill, which was sharing your data, and that's what got me into privacy. So I wrote that bill, and my wife helped me with that because she did privacy for the healthcare industry. And she was like, when we passed it, she was super excited. She's like, "I got 2-3 more bills we got to work on before you leave," which was biometrics and AI, which we had a framework the next year, but I just couldn't take it on because of the lift that this bill was, that the Privacy Act was. But I think last year when ChatGPT happened, and keeping in touch with Maroney and the other states that were doing it, there was a talk, is like, we should step up and do this, because I think the thought with privacy is we don't want to be in that place with artificial intelligence, because it's moving so fast and so rapidly, and we don't want to be behind on it. And even now, we're probably still behind on it. By the time we get this bill enforceable, it will be way behind. So I think that's a lot of how it happened for me. And working with Senator Maroney in the task force was a great adventure, and learned a lot. Still have a lot to learn, but that's my little end of the story. I don't want to dominate the whole time and give Senator Maroney some time.
Yeah, no, just to build on that, yeah, I had reached out when I was working on Connecticut's privacy bill after Senator Rodriguez got his bill out of the Senate. I think 35-0, you got it out, and I hadn't gotten mine out yet. I reached out. How'd you do that? And then that first year, 2022, we didn't. Senator Rodriguez passed the bill. Connecticut, we got it out of the Senate, and it did not make it out of the House. And then we came back, with the process. But as Senator Rodriguez mentioned, through Dave, we met. We did a number of us went on his podcast and met that way. And then we started. Those of us who didn't get it across the finish line started meeting. He had already at that time gotten the bill across the finish line. And then the next year, or so that was 2021, I guess, because 2022 I passed the that bill and then created a task force to look at children's privacy, to look at to look at automated decision making, right? And started then, and because we had the right to opt out of the processing for the solely automated decision making, and so we started looking at that in 2022. Then November 30th of 2022, everyone started hearing about AI when ChatGPT was launched, and it became very real when it's in everyone's pockets. But we were looking at first government use in 2023. We passed the government use bill in Connecticut, as well as a children's privacy bill, and created another task force, a lot of task forces, right? And then to look at, regulating private industry use of AI. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of this has been learning, right? What were the battles? Like as you go through and and things don't work out the way you want them to, you have to try to learn and move forward. So what were the initial objections? And the way I negotiate my bills now, I make sure that I have an email sent also to the House so that they know. I think the first time people got to the House and told them I was refusing to meet with people and all of these things, which is insane, because when I got FOI, it was like 1,000 pages of emails I had written to people. But again, you learn. And I think try to be as transparent, through the process this last time after learning, right, that our task force meetings in Connecticut are publicly broadcast. This year, when I worked on the bill, I released, as I was going along, I was trying to release publicly the amendments, right, and put them on the system so that, and that was a frustration. I didn't think that necessarily, like, just because people had a lobbyist who knew me, they got to see a draft and other people didn't. So I just try to, and anticipating what are potential objections later on and going through. But yeah, we've worked together over the years. We've been to the conferences together, kind of building our relationship. And this past year, we definitely worked together a lot.
Yeah. So like I said, Colorado has really made history here at this point with passing the Colorado AI Act. And I think a lot of people were surprised that happened and happened so quickly. So Senator Rodriguez, can you talk a little bit about what that process looked like and the kind of key factors that you thought contributed to its success?
I'm still trying to figure that out completely. It was kind of interesting because a lot of people were surprised and interested. People knew from last year that I was working on this multi-state task force, and it was always communicated through whether presentations I was doing with Senator Maroney when we were at TechNet with other colleagues on this task force that, look, we're working on this policy. We heard all the issues with the Privacy Act about uniformity and all that, and working on the policy process was about being uniform. And it was kind of an interesting process for me because I had told everybody in my state, like, where's your bill? Where's your bill? I was like, just go look at Senate Bill 2 in Connecticut and let me know, because that will be our bill. And I was with Senator Maroney through a couple of iterations, looking at his feedback, getting that on my side, which I'm like probably was always one addition behind by the time Senator Maroney had tweaked it. And then they said comments like, yeah, I think we just did that. But it was always kind of conforming with what he did. We were trying to make a uniform policy, and this was a different way to do it, was to try to align it with some small tweaks based on our enforcement pieces. But finally, I got to a point in April, which, I had been telling everybody, and they'd been giving me feedback on Jim's bill, that I have to introduce it at some point. And that's why it took a little longer to go out. But to say there wasn't conversation and feedback going was probably true. It just probably wasn't getting the attention because it hadn't been introduced. But the tech associations in Colorado and the chambers and them all knew it was coming. So it may have seemed fast and furious, but feedback that I had gotten was shared with Senator Maroney, and it was a lot of stuff he had, and we aligned them as we did it. And then once the bill got in, and Senator Maroney and I have little different processes in our chambers, we were able to tweak. Many of us were on the phone every weekend for a couple of hours towards the end there. And I think even the last few days of when it got out of the Senate, we were having multiple meetings to make tweaks on it as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with the trust from the colleagues that we have that this is a space that we're in, and they gave us some of that trust to get it through the legislature. It wasn't easy by any means, but I think having a reputation of being in this space was a beneficial piece to getting the bill through, because it's complicated. Nobody understands what the words mean, but you know, if you've got the trust of your colleagues that you're doing the right thing and you're stakeholdering. And I have nobody in Colorado saying I wasn't meeting with them and listening. So I think that's the biggest piece, because they will say, like Senator Maroney said, he's not taking meetings or feedback. It's like, that's not true. And I think that was reiterated as it went through the process. I think the national groups were not happy with it, but a lot of the local groups were like, we're not getting everything, but he's listening and he's taking feedback. So
I guess following up on that, you know, the law for the Colorado AI Act doesn't go into effect until February 2026. There's, of course, going to be this task force and another iteration of the working group to be able to continue to really refine on this model. Do you have any thoughts around how you might be iterating on this framework moving forward? And to a point that you made earlier, making sure that it stays relevant with the technology as it changes.
Through the task force and the discussions, and the bill was much broader as introduced, and it was had a lot of other coverages. It was always designed to be a chassis or a framework of more policy. It was never designed to be, you're all bad and we're going to do something. It's like, we're just asking for common sense, simple things that should be done, similar to privacy. You should know when you're interacting with it. You should be testing to make sure it's safe. And there should be some accountability for it. It's not overly burdensome to think about it. I mean, it's going to be complicated because it's in a new realm for the assessments and how that gets developed. But it's the funny thing is, I think right after our bill passed, the federal government put out their guidelines for the AI task force.
Yeah.
I didn't read the whole thing at first, but they had the one-page task sheet, and I was sending this to the governor's people as it was happening. I was like, here's the broad framework. Bullet 2 is controlling biases. That's all our bill does. And the second to last bullet, you must have a comprehensive privacy framework before you even get into this. And we were already set up for that. So I was like, you know, we're leading in this already. We have an opportunity to lead in it. It's like, we're not going overboard like people per se. And it's the same with privacy. Your bill doesn't, you know, they wanted opt-in and they wanted private rights of action. And it's like, it's all realistic, but it's harder to do in a micro section. And I think the feds pursuing a right of action is the right way to go. But I also think that's a reason it gets stifled as much as they say they want it, when the devil's in the details. Yeah.
Senator Maroney, moving over to you. So your journey with AI legislation was also extremely significant, even though the bill didn't pass. What were some of the primary challenges that you faced, and what are your plans for iterating on your framework moving forward?
Yeah, the major objection, I think, we worked through a lot of this together. Senator Rodriguez and I were on the phone, every week, and probably near the end, like every other night. It seemed like. At one point, we actually, testimony came and someone sent me a draft of their testimony, and they said that I needed to do more stakeholdering. And then I told Senator Rodriguez, I said, I showed that to my majority leader, and the majority leader called him and said, "You cannot, that's not true. You can't submit that testimony." And I said, "Yeah, my majority leader's pissed." And he said, "Well, you can tell them the Colorado majority leader is also very upset with them, because I've been on the phone with you more than I want to be." But so there, there was pushback. Again, initially, both advocates didn't feel it was strong enough. Industry felt it was too strong. I think, we joke we had the miracle bill. It was both ending industry and worse than doing nothing. But, we've worked through and listened to that. And in the end, the main objection for me was my governor, who just thought it would stifle innovation, which, I disagree with that premise. And actually, my brother was just on a webinar for the Committee for Economic Development, and one of the CEOs who was talking on that said that well-crafted legislation is good for business, and the ability to work with legislators to draft well-crafted legislation spurs innovation. It doesn't stifle it. And that's really what we've tried to do. We've tried to work with industry. We need to know what they can comply with. We've tried to work, with the advocates to make sure that we're providing the protections. We'll be back next year. I think, again, the first time I learned, with the privacy, getting that out was just that I needed someone in the house. And so I had a strong co-sponsor in the House. I think I need more strong co-sponsors in the House next time. I think we need to do a year's worth of educating for the need for this, so that people understand why we're doing this. I think, right, the whole Simon Sinek, what's your why? Why is this so important? Why do we need to do it? I think, we're working on building advocates outside of the building, right? Like people need to understand that there is a call for this. And so I actually had a meeting this morning with the Boys and Girls Club of Milford. They're going to be doing AI training for students over the summer. We were able to get them a grant for that, and we want to partner to do more training with them. But they also want me to teach advocacy to their students, and their students, the Boys and Girls Club will help advocate for this bill next year. And so we're reaching out to educate different groups, I think, various stakeholders, to have them come and help us advocate. We'll, work on the final changes I planned on making but never made. We'll be making those, aligning with some of the changes that were made in Colorado. Get a draft out publicly over the summer at some point. And then there were pieces that we took out that we want to work on for next year. So we want to look at, again, the general purpose AI, but not more in the transparency, like nutritional labels, because if you are going to be using something in a high risk use case, we want to make sure whoever's implemented in the high risk use case has the information they need to do the impact assessments, right? So, and then also NIST is coming out with their definition, so making sure we're aligning with what NIST is doing, as well as looking at the digital watermarking and content provenance for next year. I think a lot of the economic development pieces of the bill we're able to do, right? We got in the budget creating algorithms to help reduce health inequities. And so I was at a Yale forum yesterday. I spoke with one of their provosts to see if we can partner with the university. New Vance Hospital System was there. I'm going to reach out to Hartford Healthcare and Yale Hospital to see if we can, we're going to offer $25,000 grants to teams to compete to create algorithms that'll help reduce health inequities. We have $50,000 to $75,000 grants for hospitals to clinically integrate the algorithms and to use VR training. So those things we're doing. The online AI Academy we're going to create. I had a meeting earlier this week with Charter Oak. We're going ahead with that. We're going to continue working with nonprofits. We need to partner and meet people where they are and get training out. Again, I think that's my biggest concern, right? Like, I think that we need to get the regulations in early. We saw that so many of our colleagues have seen with social media got away from us. We feel we don't want to make that mistake again. But the workforce development piece, if we're not training people over the next 2 years, people are going to be left behind. And, there's the McKinsey report on potential to increase the racial wealth gap by over $43 billion a year. But there's also, recently Microsoft and LinkedIn had a report that over 60% of employers, knowledge economy employers, won't hire someone who doesn't have generative AI skills. And 71% said they'd take someone with generative AI skills and less experience over someone with more experience and no generative AI skills. So the time is now, right? Like, we need to partner and get out and train people.
Yeah, I think on the topic of partnership, like, what really makes you both attractive lawmakers is like this whole stakeholdering process that you both very much are focused on. So we've talked about the bipartisan multi-state working group a little bit, but I'm wondering if you both wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about that, what that process was, what the purpose was, and then going into your sessions, you both received both support and criticism from trade associations, industry, civil society. How do you balance those different perspectives when you're crafting your legislation?
I'm gonna let you start.
Oh, man, I was gonna let you go. Yeah, and so I mean, the multi-state working group, I guess, again, part of that came out of the privacy, working on data privacy, the people not wanting a patchwork. So we wanted to create a framework and work with other states, so that we can have something that companies can comply, right? And it'll our goal is, it is like privacy, that you'll have people take that. And it's ironic, unfortunate that Senator Carlisle from Washington created this framework that we've all passed, and they haven't passed a comprehensive bill in Washington yet. So, but what we've seen is other states are taking this now and going further with it, right, than we did. And so, Rep. Elkins, who was part of our multi-state working group, we had the first dinner to set up that multi-state working group at NCSL last summer. Rep. Elkins, Senator Rodriguez, Rep. Capriglione, Rep. Bonner, and Senator Gonzalez from New York met for a dinner there, and that's where Senator Rodriguez came out with this famous rule. First rule about AI Club is no one can talk about AI Club, but here we are on on LinkedIn Live talking about AI Club. And some people think we incessantly talk about it, but no, I think again, the partnership, balancing feedback, right? Like, and it's like any important decision, right? You have to gather all the best available information, and in the end, be responsible for making a decision. And so having great people to bounce things off of, Tatiana, I think I bounced a lot of things off of you, right? I bounced them off of Senator Rodriguez, Dave, others, Professor Suresh, on some of the things. So the great thing about being a legislator is people answer our calls for some reason. I don't know why, but you can reach out and have access to a lot of the professors. A lot of people in industry were great. And also, we took feedback from civil society as well, looking at their suggestions. And so tried to streamline it by putting out publicly and then taking red lines instead of doing all of the meetings. But we definitely still took a lot of meetings to talk through and try to reach where we could, right? And if we had goals, and I think with the legislation, right, you have to say what's most important to you, and where are you willing to trade, and what are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I echo that. It's and Senator Maroney said about the privacy bill. One of the reasons it took me a couple of years to even do that, and I'm sure Senator Maroney lived through it, having years trying to pass it and taking it from his majority leader from when he did it, is it's frustrating because you're kind of alone. You don't have a team. You don't have lobbyists saying, we're going to help you do this. We're going to go chase this down. Both sides are kind of like just at you, and it's new innovative policy. So it's uncomfortable for everybody, and everybody wants it right. And sometimes with policy, and something I've learned over my years is like, we put so much onus, like if the bill passes, like I've been here many times and we run a lot of bills, and it may not always be perfect, but it's not like we can't fix it.
Right.
and that's where everybody, the whole premise is like, this is going to end the world. I was like, it really doesn't. It's just a talking point in the building, and it stirs people up. But, having the runway for this to get enforced and tweak it if we need to, because I've already received some good feedback from some small tech companies. Like we think we're going to be pulled in this way, and we're concerned about this. And I'm like, that's productive feedback to take to try to address. I think they're the smaller ones who develop for larger developers. Is like, are we getting swept into this as well? And I was like, that's probably not the intent. We can probably adjust and tweak that.
Right.
But like any bill or laws, they're made to be changed. We have rulemaking in Colorado for a lot of these risk assessments, which will be great because I have an AG's office that's kind of geared up for this type of work, and they're passionate about it. And I think they'll do a thoughtful thing and also be able to be more nimble than a legislator who has to wait, like for Texas, every 2 years to fix something, or us who has, and this is being transformative policy is hard in 120-day session. But I think Colorado, it's weird to see small states. I had an email yesterday from some guy that's an attorney for Disney, and is like, I'm getting a lot of questions from my clients. Is like, why Colorado? Why is Colorado first? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, California has a lot longer runway. I think they'll do it. They were the first with privacy, but I think, being the first ones out and passionate in this, you have a narrow focus of legislators across the country that want to do this, that obviously you get the trust of your colleagues that help you do it. And, sometimes you have to push things through and scare off the beast. But I think if you're recognized as a legislator that does the work and and has an open mind and tries to balance things, you
Mhm.
get trust from your colleagues for the votes. So
Yeah, and I think a really positive goal of both of yours in kind of creating this framework was the idea of interoperability and the idea of making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel when you're looking at things like the EU AI Act. You have interoperability for impact assessments, the risk management framework from NIST. So there's an audience question from Amy Miller at MLEX. Did you all at all work with any regulators in the EU, or even looking at like what the federal government here in the US has been doing, or vice versa, when developing this framework? Or
We had during the multi-state working group, we had 2 different presentations. During the Connecticut task force, we had someone else present and had reached out to some questions. It was fascinating learning the EU process, right? The trilogues and everything is very different. But yeah, we did have some people present and did look there. I'm not sure if you had anyone else,
no,
beyond what we had done.
I mean,
There.
I think the resources we had with the privacy attorneys who followed that framework, and the think tanks and the scholars that gave input was probably the most useful. And and that was the goal was always like, okay, well, EU's doing it, so we can do it, and NIST and all the other groups that are putting out framework was all taken into consideration for how we were trying to harmonize this.
Mhm. And I guess given the rapid pace of AI development, what do you see as kind of the most critical components of an effective AI governance, given that other states, other jurisdictions might be starting to draft their own legislation?
I'll let you start, or I can start.
Advice. I mean, I think there's a few low hanging fruits in the sense of AI. And now that my AI algorithm on my news feeds has put me into the AI world of massive amounts of news data, and seeing how many things are happening and lawsuits, and the FTC is starting to regulate this, and our bill looks at the harms and bias. And one of the nicest quotes I say: just because you're using technology does not give you an excuse to harm another people with discrimination. So, and our bill is not transformative enforcement in that, because we're trying to recognize the innovation is like, look, we just want good players that are trying to do the right thing, and knowing that AI is going to have errors because it's a learning model, and it's still developing, that we're not trying to do any gotchas on anybody. We just want people to say, hey, we're developing a product, and we just want to make sure that we've done our diligence to say it's safe. I think opening the doors and talking to everybody with other states of legislation is important. Having an open policy meeting and trying to balance it is the hard thing, because it's new. I see some of the low hanging fruits, which were in the bill that we had, was the synthetic stuff, the revenge porn, and some of the harms that are happening should be lower hanging fruit that could probably be regulated faster than some of the other ones. The discussions that we had on the general purpose AI was a lot broader, which is probably why it came out. And you look at it that way, as like, even this bill, I have an interest in HR processes, hiring, firing, selection. That's a whole depth of itself too, which was why this bill was based with basic disclosures, and then you can go industry by industry as they start developing, and it starts becoming more important in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the talking about, oftentimes legislators, we can feel alone. So, I'm going to tell people the same thing. I'm the oldest of my cousins, so I told them I made mistakes so you don't have to. So when it comes to legislation, we've made mistakes so you guys don't have to. Please join us. The multi-state working group, we're planning on reconvening that. It's part of NCSL now. We're folding some in, but we're also going to keep going, because just to make sure we have anyone who needs help right in, wants to join and sit in on those meetings with us. The low hanging fruit, I do think data privacy is important. I think now that we're up to, what's the tally of states now? Is it over 20, or we're getting there? Depending on how you count some of the states, right?
If they get signed,
Yeah. But there's a framework for data privacy. If your state doesn't have comprehensive data privacy, I would start there. And then, you can make some tweaks on that. I think, again, one of our goals of starting with really like the impact assessment basic product liability testing. I mean, you do that in so many things. If you're going to build, you have to do an environmental impact assessment, right? And so that's a flexible framework. What you're testing for may change, but the fact that you have to stop and test something before you launch it out to the general public is a common product liability issue. So, but I think the transparency piece, just people, again, Utah passed that bill, right? That's you have a right to know when you're interacting with AI. That was part of ours, as well as the impact assessments. I think, looking at Assemblymember Jackie Irwin's bill, I think it's 2013 out in California. It's a data transparency. So kind of taking our data requirements out of this bill, and you can kind of meld those two together. That's a great starting point. Again, the nutrition labels, people have a right to know what it went into making that system and when they're interacting with the system.
All right, I got the message that we are at the 30-minute mark. So I guess, do you have any last minute things that you want to say, any ideas for what's next, whether that's refining on this framework or looking at other kind of data privacy tech policy issues?
I want to look into the HR decision pieces. I don't know how soon I'll get into that because there's still work. I don't know if there's work that needs to be done on the bill we passed, but I'm going to make sure I've had conversations with everybody to say, it's like, okay, we talked about it. What do you want? It's a nice place to be in because the bill's passed. So now I get to go to the civil groups and the business groups and say, well, this is coming. So now you can't just sit on the outside and say, we don't like this. It's like, now you have to work together, and you can't come say, we're going to make this stronger on one side and not make it stronger on the other side. There has to be some negotiation. I was like, if they want to piece out and the civil groups want something, we'll try to figure it out. But one of the things I want to say to other people that are looking at this policy is like, and then Senator Maroney is like, we're not perfect. I made mistakes on my first privacy bill on some words I put in, and it's fearful because then other states take that and say, we have it over here, and don't always agree with that and follow up with the legislators. I think many of us that have been through this policy fight and discussion are happy to take feedback or calls from somebody. It's like, what were you thinking here? Or why did you do this? And, sometimes like it's the only thing I could do to get it out of a chamber or whatever. And that other legislator might not have that. And just now to see where our policy was 2-3 years ago on privacy and how far it's advanced with policy going across the country. It was always like one state would do a strong one state would weaken it. It was a hodgepodge to see, and it's exciting to see how much stuff on the framework of privacy, how it's advanced in policy across the countries, whether it's a bill with a private right of action or strengthening the minimization. And it's neat to see, or somebody taking on getting rid of pseudonymous data, which would be a huge lift too. But just seeing the other states that are pushing it and strengthening the regulations, I think is the best way to go. And I was talking to Senator Maroney in the group before, is like looking at the federal law, you see a lot of things that were done in the states. I was the first state to put a global privacy control blanket on privacy law. And it was like, that will never happen. And I think I saw that in the federal act. So, that's where, we're the incubators of policy here. And when the feds will look at it, it'll be the work that we're done in the states that will be reflected. So I just, to anybody out there that's doing it, we're happy to, we're a small niche group across the country.
Yeah, misery loves company. Please reach out. We can we'll share in your pain with you. So it is a unique battle, and we're happy to talk about our battle scars with you. And as Senator Rodriguez mentioned, if we can help, please reach out. He was very helpful to me. I randomly, as he said, I randomly reached out, and we've developed a great relationship. As far as what I'm looking at next year, I still need to get this across the finish line. I'm not in the same position with you that it's actual law, so people need to negotiate.
Part of me wonders if introducing it at the last minute later made it easier to pass, because then give more time to beat it up. I don't know. I don't know the secret sauce of how that happened, but I was super excited, hoping we would get it done together. So but I hope you get to take tweaks I made and strengthen them next year, and then
just like privacy. I'll follow you a year later, and
I just passed your children's privacy in Colorado, so that's how it works.
And so I need to get the bill across the finish line. I want to look at the digital watermarking section that we were going to take out in the end, look at the general purpose, so stakeholder those over the next year. And then, I need to go back to our comprehensive privacy. I need to strengthen up. We gave the entity level exemption for GLBA. We've seen that hasn't worked out. I like what Oregon, the way they had done their exemption. So we're going to try to match to what Oregon had done on our GLBA exemption.
Good, because that was my first mistake on my Privacy Act, was my exemption of GLBA. So
Yep.
Don't follow Colorado on that one.
Yeah. Well, if you told me that 2 years ago, sure now. But then, there've been a lot of great additions to the definition of sensitive data. I think not going to take all of the ones in Vermont, but a lot of additions in Vermont. Oregon made good additions, and so Monique Priestley did a great job in Vermont there. I think that Senator Hester in Maryland, the data minimization pieces, we'll look at. Again, those will be stakeholder. I don't know if we'll take them or not, but they're in what Rep. Elkins changes in the Minnesota privacy law. So I think we need to look at, do any of those make sense for Connecticut, and stakeholder that. So we'll have the two bills going, a data privacy cleanup as well as the AI bill.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you both so much for your insights and experiences. It's extremely clear that the journey towards effective governance is extremely difficult, but increasingly crucial. Your dedication to kind of like a balanced approach that's inclusive sets a really good precedent for other states. Really looking forward to seeing how these efforts evolve and staying in contact with both of you. And thank you so much for the audience for joining us today. Stay tuned for what's next for the future of AI.
Okay.